Hello and welcome to episode 50 of the Freo Big Footy podcast. This week we'll be completing the review of the Fremantle list from season 2014, having a look at the trade news that's happened over the last week or so. Not that much has involved Fremantle, and then obviously have a look at what's coming up ahead with the pre-season. Joining us this week for our 50th episode is our usual resident Victorian expert, Seppo. How are you, mate?
I'm good, Centurions, and good to be here after a nice quiet week in trade week.
Yeah, no, it was there was a little bit of talk early in the week that Fremantle might be a little bit involved in maybe trying to upgrade a pick, or obviously after James Frawley decided to go to Hawthorn. But at the end of the day, Fremantle really ended up sitting down on their backsides and really doing nothing at all. So they're obviously confident with what they had in the draft coming up, but obviously interesting to see which way they go, with obviously a list spot still needing to be taken care of, Seppo.
Yeah, and then now it leaves us with all our first pick still untouched at number 13. We've got pick 34, and also they haven't really mentioned in the article released today by the club, but pick 54 is our round 3 pick. So at the moment we've got 2 main list spots available. We probably need a third by the end of all the list lodgements over the next few weeks. So yeah, 3 decent picks, and it's a shame we couldn't have improved our draft position, but you've got to be confident, like someone mentioned on the board today, I think it was Arcasius, that what we can do with pick 71 is sometimes better than what other clubs can do with pick 1. So let's not be too worried about that at their current draft positions.
No, absolutely not. And I think Fremantle have shown, in the last few drafts that have been able to get some quality players down later in the draft, but obviously the key thing will obviously be trying to replenish the key position stocks, and obviously, as we talked about before, Seppo, maybe just trying to find a decent quality small defender as well to go on that list. Any other interesting news from Trade Week that you thought was quite interesting or a bit out of left field?
It was curious that the West Coast didn't really have many movements. I think they did try and lure 1 or 2 players over, and I don't know if they had much up for trade, but it's quite interesting to see that both of our West Australian clubs didn't manage to attract, even though we were after 1 or 2 targets that we didn't actually lure them across. So it's kind of interesting just to see that our local rivals didn't sort of get one up on us, and nothing to rub our faces into. So yeah, it's quite interesting.
Yeah, I thought the interesting even today at the end of the just towards the end of the last couple of minutes of Trade Week, with Geelong swapping their 2 picks with Adelaide to get up to pick 10. I wonder if obviously they'll be looking to get that extra speed. Geelong will be looking for a quick play, you would think, after losing Christensen and Varco. So it'd certainly be interesting to see if they end up picking up someone like Jared Pickett from WA, and you just about bet the Eagles will go into meltdown on their board if they do pick up Pickett with that 10th pick. Right
before theirs at 11, and obviously 2 more after that gets us to pick 13 where we sit. So yeah, it's going to be quite interesting just to see what falls before us, especially as there's only a certain amount of clubs represented. So just really quickly, that first 10 as it stands is St Kilda at 1, Melbourne with 2 and 3, GWS with 4, jumps to Collingwood at 5, and then GWS go back to 6 and 7. Gold Coast have 8, Collingwood with 9 again. Geelong have now moved to 10th after trading with Adelaide. And then you've got West Coast at 11, Richmond at 12th, and then we slot into 13th position there with our first pick. So it's just interesting to see what's before us and what will potentially be on the table when we get to our first pick, which you'd think, judging by the last couple of years, is just going to be best available. So I don't see us picking a tool unless they decided last year that Aptness was the best available and a nice tool. So you never know what we could go for. It'll be interesting just to see the phantom drafts over the next few weeks pop out to see what's going to be around pick 13.
Yeah, I thought Fremantle may have maybe even try to get involved a little bit, Seppo, with the sort of Paddy Ryder to Port Adelaide one, and maybe if we gave up our second round pick for someone like Mason Shaw, who's on their list and not currently getting a game, particularly if Ryder goes there, he'll shuffle down the list a little bit, and maybe it would have been a bit of a sweetener for the Bombers if we gave up our second pick, even if it was only a few spots, would have made it a little bit better. But obviously Fremantle, well, from all accounts, didn't seem to be making too much movement later in the week. Obviously was talk about Schumakers and Subban, but after that was sort of rejected by Fremantle. There didn't seem to be any sort of whispers or rumours or anything further out in regards to what Fremantle were looking for.
Yeah.
So, all right. Any other points you want to bring up, Seppo, before we move on to the last the third part of our review from the season gone?
No, it's just an hour-long little time to wait to actually get through a bit of minor list movements. I think there's a delisted free agency period coming up, but we've got really nothing much happening until probably the Doig medal on the 15th of November, and then you've got to wait until November 27th for the draft. So quite a bit to happen in between then, and even the International Rules Series that's happening at Patterson Stadium on the 22nd of November on Saturday night. So that's a lot to happen in between now and then, and this is when obviously a lot of players take their time off still, so there's not much actually happening even down at Freo Oval. So it's a very quiet time for us, and we'll click into the player reviews now.
Yeah, I was just on that point. I'm still surprised that Fremantle have their the Doig medal so late compared to other clubs. It's just does seem strange, particularly with the advent of free agency coming more and more in that. It's such a long distance between when we finish the season and when the Doig medal is. So, but obviously there's reasons for it. But you wouldn't be surprised at all in the future if they do shorten that gap. But time will tell. All right, as you said, Seppo, we're going to have a look at the player reviews. Number 21 number 23 for us was the last one we're up to, or the one we're up to now with Chris Mayne. Obviously had a bit of an interrupted pre-season with his injuries, I think with a bit of a back and groin issues, and he never really seemed to certainly hit the strides from last year that or the heights he reached last year. He did get better as the season wore on, and towards the end of the season you saw glimpses of his best, but just never really hit the ground running this year.
Yeah, I suppose Maine's one with, as we've discussed over the last couple of dissections of these players, that had a year that was almost backwards on the year before, and I think injury played a part to that, and it'd just be great, even for what we knew him for back in 2012 and 13, that Deadeye Dick goal kicking. It wasn't really there and didn't get on the board much, but even just his work rate and what he did, I think he showed a bit of it in round one against Collingwood. But obviously it was a lingering injury that caused him to be a bit down on output, yet he did really hold his spot, and I think he only missed one game for the whole year, playing 23 out of the 24 available games. So done pretty right to get through it, but maybe could have done with a bit of a rest.
Yeah, I mean, always hindsight's a good thing, isn't it? And obviously, with kicking 13 goals for the game was definitely below his output from the previous year, but obviously he's still averaging 4 tackles a game, but let's just hope that he can get himself fit in the off-season and get back to his hustling and frenetic best, because he certainly does add an edge down to our forward line when he's up and running around at his full capacity.
Yep.
All right. Max Duffy, number 24, only played 2 games for the year, but showed a little bit, and especially down in that game against Geelong where he came back into it and has been rewarded with another year on the list.
Yeah, well, it's great to see he's added his name to the club of first kick, first goal. That was a great way and great excitement and injection of energy when he got subbed on at the Geelong game down at the old G-Town, and it was a bad day for the result, but it was great for Max in terms of what he got out of the game, his goal, his entrance, the energy, and even just that little touching thing after the game about donating a bit of that match payment to the Heart Foundation and the links with his old friend that passed with a heart condition. So it was very touching, very moving for me to see that during the year, and great to see that actually got on the park and showed what everyone's been hearing about, and finally got to see some tangibles. So that was a great debut and game for Max.
Yeah, I think, obviously I saw him a few years ago when he was playing for East Fremantle as well, and he's certainly one of those enigmatic type players, and he can do things out there that you don't expect, and I think probably his teammates are also likewise. I thought he actually showed quite a bit of an improvement in his defensive pressure this year, Seppo, for playing for Peel down there. And, just as he was sort of starting to look the goods, unfortunately he got that injury with his shoulder and took him out for quite a while before sort of working his way back into it. But hopefully he can sort of take on, as you said, those little bits and pieces that he did this year and be able to maybe contribute and push towards the best 22 next year, because he does provide that little bit of X factor, and he's got a good height about him. So he may end up, being at least if nothing else, good backup in that forward line.
It's a great option to have if you're starting to put Walters or Ballas and Crozier higher up and into the midfield. It's another true small forward in that forward 50 of ours. So,
all right,
good.
Next one, if you would like to, number
27. Lachie Neale. He had a fantastic year, and one that he really stepped up and showed that he can actually be a part of the midfield. And two moments really stood out for me was the Derby. I believe it was the first Derby he picked up that medal, or was it the second Derby?
No, the first one it was.
Lachie, it was the first one earlier in the year, and I think that winning goal against Carlton towards the end, he actually stood up quite well to take that kick, and for a small man, he loves to get involved and really picked up his rates of possessions in every single game. And I think he actually finished leading possession getter for us at least 3 or 4 times this year. So it was a really testament, when he's in a midfield with accumulators like Barlow and Mundy and Fife, it's great to see that we've got another guy that's not yet an 8th grader, but give him another year or two and he's going to be right up there. And his durability and the fact that he paid once again 23 out of the 24, he really starts to become another important cog. And once his body starts to fill out a bit more, even though it's tiny, he's going to become a nice, strong, nuggety option in that midfield.
It certainly will, and it'll be interesting to see. As you said, like he seemed to take that step forward this year, and his quality in work. He didn't seem to get quite as many goals from the clearances this year that he had in the past. But I must admit, I was very surprised that he was unable to get a spot in the Australian under-23 side when you had a look at some of the players that were out there. I mean, granted, there were some quality players out there, but I certainly thought he did enough maybe to get a spot out there. But that gave him good incentive, and but we'll see if he's able to take that next step again next year, because I think if he if he can continue to do those clearances and that sort of in-body work that he was doing before, it just adds another dimension to our midfield. And particularly if he can sort of play in that forward pocket a little bit and be a good crummer down there, just particularly if they do change the rotations, it will certainly give us an ability to rotate it.
He does have a great goal sense when he's up front, and especially at those stoppage situations, what we saw from him early with, I think he did it a couple of times in the middle of the year. I think the game was against GWS or Melbourne up in Darwin, that he just rove the pack beautifully and just snuck a quick one out towards goal and just knew where the goals were. So it's a great option to have when you're up front.
Oh, yeah, and let's just hope that, as you said, he'll cement himself even. Well, I think he has cemented himself this year as the best in the best 22 and probably even in the best 18. So even though he did quite start regularly on the bench, but he certainly didn't get the vest any time this year, really. So I think I think he's one of those few players that you could say on our list this year that stood up and showed a significant improvement from the year before. All right, number 29, Pav Seppo.
The Pav had a nice, solid, serviceable year, but the big highlight was obviously when he ticked over his 300 games with 600 goals. It was a big highlight, and even just watching the club, the top 10 goals for the year, that running goal he had at the MCG in front of me in Richmond was another almost moment where Pav wound back the clock a bit and showed that he's still young and he's got plenty left of footy in him. So he's had a nice year without doing too much to really excite us like he had the year before. I think his 2013 form overall the whole year was probably better than this year, but he still had a fantastic year, and you can't argue with what he's provided and just been a great captain.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he kicked the game I thought against Sydney, he kept us in that game for long periods of time. He had a cracking game against Hawthorn where he kicked 5 goals. Just a bit unfortunate he had his sort of a bit wayward in the semi-final against Port. But as you said, 46 goals, and you certainly can't argue with his performance. And there's plenty of other blokes to look in the mirror before you'd look at Pav, that's for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, but I think the highlight was certainly his 300th game, first West Australian born player or sort of West Australian base player to get that milestone, and obviously kicking that goal, his 600th goal as well in the same game was just a terrific game. And as I said, we'll certainly cherish him for the time that he plays, because I don't think he'll have too many more seasons left in him.
Mm. Moving on, number 30, Zach Clark. Now, he had a bit of an up and down year, but he was in the side for a long period of time and formed the sort of number 1 and 2 ruck partnership with Big Aaron. So he got 21 games out this year and sort of hit the scoreboard occasionally. He kicked 12 for the year. Nothing really memorable, but it's one that a lot of people wanted a bit more out of, especially physically. And you expect at his age now, that he's been on the list for a couple of years, that he'll start to impose himself. And he almost had not a breakout game, but 1 or 2 games. I think the early derby was one, and there might have been another earlier game against Sydney where he started to sort of pick up a bit, but he sort of plateaued a bit during the year. And it's one player that you'd look at and to saying, all right, you know there's potential there. He can get better. Age is now not an excuse, as he's starting to get towards. He's going to be playing, almost looking to hit his 100th game by the end of next season. So he's at 75 now, or 74. And Zach Clark should really start to take a bit of pressure off Aaron and really start to perform as a almost first ruckman.
Yeah, I mean, I think the year before he certainly seemed to play better as that in that first ruck role, and obviously, once again, unfortunately with the pre-season music festival injury, didn't allow him to get off to his to a great start. And it doesn't matter who you are, if you miss that pre-season, it certainly sets you back a bit. But I don't think there's probably been a more divisive player on our board, Seppo, this year than Zach Clark. People seem to either rate him, and I'm one that does, but there's plenty on there who don't and would be happy to trade him out. So, but he certainly garnishes opinion on the board, that's for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, number 31, Aaron Sandilands had another terrific year, mate, and cracked the All-Australian side. It's hard to argue with his form throughout the year as well.
Yeah, well, I think that All-Australian form was quite warranted, even though a lot of people were claiming Jacobs had the better year. But I think even when you just look at the game when we played Adelaide and Aaron went head-to-head with Sam Jacobs, he really took him to the cleaners that game. And Sandlands, even though he did have a couple of down games, his dominance was huge. And if you look at the amount of hit-outs he got, it was just phenomenal every game. Certainly nice, handy Supercoach inclusion, especially considering how cheap he was at the start of the year. But for those that play fantasy, he was definitely a nice, solid rock option to be in there. And only missed that one game where Griffin came in for the Saints game, where many were rested. And other than that, I think had a fantastic year and really good to see that he's going on and happy to be playing in 2015 and saying his body's fit and doesn't look like he's had need for any off-season surgery, and he'll be hitting the track hard and hoping for another great 2015.
Wait, how many years do you think, Seppo, do you think Sandy's got left in him? I mean, he obviously doesn't have quite the same issues as compared to other players in terms that he maybe even be able to sit in that forward line. Do you think he'll go for another couple of years, or do you think next year might be it?
Oh, I think next year, if he has a major injury, that may be it. But he could be managed well, not put undue duress, big trips to Queensland or Northern Territory or whatever it may be. So if he plays, 17, 18 games, gets a good couple of rests next year and start to put more of a pressure on the other guys to step up in his absence, we could probably stretch him out for another 2 years, I think. And so just leaving him there as the September specialist for 2016, become the Brad Ottens type. You never know. We might see him around a bit longer and not have to deal with the fact that we could be losing all three of Pav, McFarlane and Sandlands next year. So it'll be great to see him going around for another 2. And I think it's possible, providing we can manage him well next year.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it'd be good to see him go around for a couple of more years. And as you said, even if he can just sit in that forward line and just take a few more of those contested marks. I know he ranked 7th in the league this year, but just a few times there where you just see him get his hands to it and you just love him to be able to clunk a few more of those, particularly down in the forward 50.
Or maybe even
Like,
just get an extra couple of frees that he's deserving with the
yeah,
grappling all over. I think there was a bit of that going on this year that didn't seem to be paid as it has in the past. So it would be great to be a bit more damaging when he's at least got his hands in the air above everyone else.
yeah, I was just there. You beat me to it. As I said, he definitely got manhandled a few times and didn't get the kicks he deserved. All right, number 32, Seppo Stephen Hill.
Yeah, well, Stephen Hill had another solid year. I think he had a couple of games again troubled by injury. He's certainly damaging when he did play, and he had obviously that short sort of spell outside of the games. But it's one player that I think didn't hit his full potential. You just think he's capable of a couple more goals. He kicked 18 this year, but it's a type of player that we're constantly saying on the board and on this podcast that you don't have to give him too much. If the opposition, goes against their own peril and doesn't apply a tag, he'll cut you to shreds, and he doesn't need much to do it. So, I think he displayed that a couple of times this year, and didn't have a real. You wouldn't give him an A or an A plus, but he had a nice solid B grade performance all this year. So expect Stephen Hill to be another player with a bit of scope for improvement. He's over the 100 game mark, so he's done his apprenticeship. He should be putting it on every week and hopefully lifting up to A grade status consistently next year.
Yeah, it was interesting. I think there was a stat going around before the Port Adelaide game that any time Hill got over 25 possessions, we were unbeaten. But unfortunately, in that game, Stephen Hill, I think, did get that, and he did play well early. He just missed that goal in the second quarter where he just bolted through the middle. I really think if he kicked that, might have just been enough. Just the crowd would have just got it, super excited, and just sort of, you could just feel the air go out of the stadium when he missed it. And certainly not blaming him for the loss by any stretch, but it was just that bit of excitement you needed just to sort of push it over the top, and he just unfortunately missed it. But I think he certainly did take a step forward again this year. But in the finals, he did struggle a little bit with those with the lockdown, particularly in the Sydney game where Cunningham was able to get on top of him, and he didn't really push through it. All right, 33, Cameron Sutcliffe.
I think Cameron had a solid year. One of the only, I think, 5 or 6 players that played every single game, and it's one that I really enjoyed, even just the from his round one performance against Collingwood, and the way he's just linked up and almost become like a half back, even now, to even just talking about him being a part of the midfield rotations, and his elite long kicking and sort of bit of speed as well. The way he moves was great to watch this year. I've almost penciled him in now as a backman, but you think he's got great potential. He's almost like people are casting lights, just like Mundy was in his early days running off half back, and you could see now, someone says that Sutcliffe's going to be the next Mundy. You can almost see it now that he's got that type of ability. If he starts to grow and build, he can. Mundy's a great mentor for him, and I'd love to see him there potentially in the midfield. But as a review for his whole year, he had a pretty solid year, and I'd give him a B plus, close enough to an A if he just sort of got a bit more mongrel to him and a bit more harder edge and not get too caught out on the defensive side. I think Cameron's going to be a great player.
Yeah, I think I agree, and I think he's sort of. I think he's more of a natural wingman myself. It'd be great to see him get up into the midfield. Unfortunately, we just haven't got anyone down there who can cover his spot in defence at the moment. And ideally, that might be something rectified at the draft. But if he is able to get there, I know when he was first drafted on our list, you see him running up and down the wing at East Fremantle, and he's just got that ability to run all day. And I know he does make a few errors here and there, but generally his kicking skills are pretty solid. So, as you said, I think he's another one of those guys who'll be on our list, and certainly a great part of the side for the years to come.
I think when you think about his previous year, where he was a sub that many times and really struggled to sort of get continuity and get right into the game, he's played every single game this year amongst players like Lee Spur and Paul Duffield down the back that were due to go over soon. So it was great to see that he's almost raised his profile and level right up there, and almost living with Fife, it must be rubbing off on him, because it sounds like he's one of Ross's favourites down there. So great to see he's actually maybe potentially a couple of years' time ready to join the leadership group.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, next one, 34, Lee Spur.
Well, like we just touched on, another one that played every single game for the year and was solid without almost saying he was better than last year, because I think 2013 he showed that he was one of the best small defenders, yet this year you'd probably give that deserving All-Australian spots to guys that were out there like Nick Smith and um, I'm just trying to think of a lot of those other smaller defenders that really didn't get beat too many times. And I think this year Lee Spur let his guard down a couple of times and not necessarily was with the football, but without it, he seemed to get caught out a couple of times. But did really solidly for how much he was obviously expected to do all year, and did get up the ground a couple of times and put a couple of goals to his name. So a couple of years ago he hadn't scored any, and all of a sudden he's kicked 3 this year. So good to see him pushing up the ground a bit more. But for Lee, I think a couple of us would be expecting him to be aiming to clean up his disposal a bit, and just work on becoming a really, really good lockdown player down back. And when we're short of, we can't afford to have a player like Lee go down with injury. So aren't we glad he's a durable type and can bash and crash for the whole year. The amount of times we see him come off with cuts to above his face and his eye, and the amount of times you see him battered and bruised and just rocks up and does it week in, week out.
Yeah, he certainly can't dismiss his courage, and that's for sure. And his ability to back into packs. As you said, he probably wasn't quite as strong as he was the year before, but I mean, certainly still a best 22 player, that's for sure, and one of those guys who certainly puts everything into the game when he gets out there. It was also good to see him kick a couple of goals this year, Seppo, as well. It's something that he doesn't do too often, but he did kick a few this year.
And he loves a good goal celebration as well, Lee.
He certainly does.
Like most backmen do when they go forward.
Yeah. All right, number 35, Michael Apinis. And obviously, Seppo saw him play quite a few times for Peel this year, and I think he is... I know there's been a lot of talk this week about players not... for Fremantle in particular, not trading for a key forward or a key player, but I really think this kid, with another year in the gym, I think he certainly has all the attributes that you're looking for. He has a terrific set of hands. His kicking's pretty solid. He knows where to run to, and I just think down the track he'll be a perfect foil for Zach Clark when Sandy retires. He's got that ability to play a little bit in the ruck, and he did that last year when Boyd went down in the TAC Cup, and I just think he will be a super player for us and hopefully he'll start that next year, but I think he's certainly got all the attributes you're looking for in a key forward.
And it's a real shame, he did get 2 games this year, but not really ideal for key forwards, and one being the conditions up in Darwin. And I think he really showed there the way, I think Ross labelled him as a beast afterwards, the way he crashed around, hit the packs. Had a good set of hands on him, but unfortunately up in Darwin, I think the ball was just a bit too slippery for anyone on that night. Even Fife was dropping them, and that says something. So he got close to kicking a goal. I think we got a bit excited all at the pub when I was watching that game, and Apnes came close to kicking a goal. So he fell short there, but from that small amount of highlights of what he did, and I think he got a bit lost the week after, I think against GWS it was, back at Subi. He did look a bit lost, but you're going to get that. So expectations are there because you can see what he's capable of. But like you said, it's going to require another off-season in the gym, and we know he's got the skill set, and apparently he's got one of the best set of gloves on him. His hands, they said, his best contested mark in his draft year. So be great to actually see him down and at least be solid for Peel all year. And if he does get a chance to step up, that he's learnt a bit. Yeah,
and that's all it's about, just trying to get those, I suppose those, experience up. And if he can get to play a few games with Pav and that sort of stuff, I think it'll only help him, when he gets out there a little bit more on his own. So obviously it'll be a bit hard sometimes to have him, Taberner and Apnes out there, but I think he will certainly be a really important player for us in going forward into the future. All right, number 36, Alex Silvani, Seppo.
Well, Alex Silvani obviously took his opportunities, got a couple of games this year, and he's still, a sub 50 game player, but he's, seemed to time his games well. He's played a lot of finals now, and almost came in and as McFarlane goes out for the last couple of years, and a great option for us down back, and another competitive type, just like Atnas. And it's one that we're almost lucky to have him on his list, and the fact that he's signed on, and everyone might have speculated at the start of the year that he wouldn't be around, but it's great to see that he's there. He's played good games. I do like Silvani. He's one of my favourites when you see how committed he is, and he's one like Spur that just goes in really hard, and you'd love to have him playing around you, and just the confidence and the courage he shows is really good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it was, there was obviously a bit of talk about whether he would stay on, being given limited opportunities, but it was good to see him take his time. And I think he certainly showed that he's, with his game against Buddy, that game against Sydney, that he'll, if he can provide that sort of contest all the time next year, he'll certainly be a handy addition. And, those, whether they play him, Johnson and obviously McFarlane all at the same time would be doubtful, but he'll certainly get plenty of opportunity next year and into the future, you'd think.
Yeah, that was definitely for defenders. You think about a season highlight. Silvani's job on Buddy in that game was fantastic until Buddy went up the field, but you can hardly blame that on Silvani. So it was a pretty good day for him just to be able to show that he can compete with the best. So great for us going forward.
Next one, number 37, Michael Johnson, Seppo. Obviously had a bit of a, probably, as I said, another player who probably didn't quite reach the heights he did in 2013, and then unfortunately in that last game against Port Adelaide ended up with a back injury and missed the rest of the finals, and he was certainly missed in terms of his presence across that half back line and his ability to intercept and keep the defence rolling. It was sorely missed in the final series.
Yeah, I think from his All-Australian effort last year to now through the year, you could see he just wasn't rolling that well off half back. And I think it was just towards the end, the last 5 or 6 games where a lot of people picked up on the board that his disposal, he started scrapping a couple more kicks and never really got back to it. And I think it was right up until the Brisbane game where I think the club had said that he had that back injury. And it was a real shame that we lost someone of his quality, because he could have, even just playing at 90% would have been nice to have out there. But obviously sometimes it's maybe better that he's not. And they did put him into, obviously, Cotton Wool for the rest of the year, which meant it got someone else with game experience out there. So unfortunately for Jono, so hopefully he has a good pre-season and doesn't require too much more further surgery, and he can hit the track running, because he'll be one that wanting to get back after missing out in the September end of the season.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think we certainly look better with him out there when he's fully fit. As you said, he did his disposal tended to drop off a little bit, but understandable when you consider his back injury. And as you said, let's just hope he gets back fully fit and ready to go next year. Number 38, Jack Hanneth, played the 3 games this year early on, and as I said, he's a bit of a work in progress, but once again, another sort of player who divides opinions on the board, Seppo.
Yeah, it's one that jury's still out for me to see whether he can actually step right up and become a dominant ruckman. For me, he's a bit too slow, and I think he showed signs out there on the AFL level. I think his numbers stacked up quite well for Peel at the waffle level. It's just when he gets to the speed of the AFL, I'm not sure if he's cut up for it as much as other ruckmen on a list are. But you never know if it's still a younger body. Maybe there's some time to get into getting his body right. I would think, it's something for him to obviously work hard at it every week at Peel to be able to get more of a call up and put pressure on the other guys that we've got on the list. But you never know how quickly things can change. He's a nice option to have there, and he showed in his couple of games, not only this year but last year, when he's had to step up. He can actually do a pretty decent job, but I think we'd want a bit more as a second or even just first choice ruckman out there.
Yeah, it was strange to see. Obviously, there was a bit of talk whether Griffin would be moved during the trade period, but there didn't seem to be any chat at all, Seppo, about him. So you'd probably have to think he would be 4th in line in terms of the ruck duties, with obviously Sandilands, Clark and Griffin ahead of him. So he'll probably get another year. This next year will be a big year for him, I think. And if you really need to show a little bit more next year for him to keep his spot on the list, you'd have to think.
Mm.
All right, number 41, Paul Duffield. Played every game this year, Seppo, and obviously one of the better users of the ball across that half-back line. And obviously, has improved, I think, considerably from probably 2 or 3 years ago before Ross Lyon got to the club. And Ross Lyon, I think, has added a bit of a harder edge to him. And he used to sort of scram a little bit. He did have 1 or 2 of those this year, particularly later in the season, but on the whole, a pretty solid season for him.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with your sentiments there. That he's definitely got the harder edge. There's less moments where I sort of cursed him mid-game for either pulling out of a contest or just not going in hard enough. And I think he did that a couple of times this year. And even one or 2 games, I just remember him stepping up and taking a couple of crucial overhead marks like Ibbotson had at stages. And it was great to see that, Duffield is getting more consistent now, that he's one of the older heads down there now and kicked over 150 games now, so he's right up there, one of the senior guys there, and you don't expect him to go soft anymore. He's been there long enough under Ross Lyon, and like you said, a great user of the football. So you do love it when he's at his best, and when you get guys like Johnson and Spur and Sutcliffe all going, it'll be a perfect combination for that back six.
Yeah, I mean, I remember that game, I think it was the last game of the season, Seppo, when they played Port Adelaide, and the ball came down on that outer wing, and he came up and cleaned up Ollie Wines, and I just, if I look back 2 or 3 years ago, there's no way I don't think he would have made that play. So I think it was definitely a development in his game, and as I said, let's hope he continues on next year, because he is starting to get on, I think, towards 30. So he, hopefully we'll see some of those younger guys starting to push him, for his spot. But let's hope he sort of takes that step up to keep it as well. All right, lucky last Seppo, probably one of those number 46, Clancy Pearce, who he showed bits particularly last year, but just never really managed to get himself going this year.
Yeah, it's hard when you think about a lot of the games this year. You wouldn't really believe it if you thought he played 9 games, because he was not really mentioned often and did sort of come in out on the side a bit. Even when I think about moments that Clancy's had this year, you kind of forget that he was almost out there. That it was a bit one of those players that sort of snuck in and out amongst the changes and subs and really didn't cement himself in the side like he did a couple of years ago on his quick turnaround. So it's another player there that obviously he did suffer from a couple of injuries this year, and even just maybe form or fitness didn't really get him right amongst all of it. So he had sort of 4 patches of games just looking earlier in the season when we played Essendon, Sydney, North, West Coast and Port. Played 5 games in a row there and made another appearance in the middle of the year against Brisbane, West Coast, Melbourne and GWS. And that was it for the year. So for him, it was a bit about consistency. And, hopefully he has a nice solid pre-season. And then he have to do a lot, because there's a lot of players now around his sort of role that are going to go past him if he doesn't actually lift the game and make it really hard for him to, get a game in the best 22.
Yeah, I mean, and the interesting thing was, I think he got when he got his chance, he had I think the first one he played from round 4 to round 8, Seppo, so he had 5 games and then got another 4 games between round 14 and 17, but just was never able to, come in and actually take advantage of that opportunity, unfortunately. And by the end, after round 17, never found his way back into the side. So, as you said, I think he'll be another one of those guys that would be, come the end of the season or come the end of next year, will be really needed to show something for him to keep his spot on the list, because I think he'd be one of those guys who could be in a bit of danger when you consider that 3 guys have to come off the list. I would have to think that he would probably be one of those guys that would be in the gun a little bit, based on what we've seen this year.
Yep, definitely.
All right, Seppo, that brings up to that's the end of our player review, and obviously Fremantle as a whole probably a little bit disappointing overall, mate. Considering obviously we got to the GF last year, and more often than not you find that teams that lose it will always think you got to lose one to win one, but unfortunately we just never seem to click and get all the players in at the right time with the right amount of level of fitness to have a real decent crack at it this year.
And I suppose it just shows from the whole year where we thought we were travelling well that it can. You've just got to get it right there, right into the season, and even you might be going into September with a pretty healthy list. It can change fairly quickly, and just shows what one or two players makes difference. So let's hope these players can hit the track and stay fit and available all season, and not just the first few rounds, but right when it counts.
Yeah, absolutely. And well, as I said, we can only we probably think that the window's got maybe a couple of years left. So we'll see if we can get her about and crack it next year. We'll any other points you want to bring up, Seppo, before we sort of finish up for the night?
No, other than just keep an eye out for anyone listening that hasn't already nominated for the Buddy Draft. If you want to get involved again, the thread's sticky there at the top. So put your name down for that, and keep an eye out in the off-season calendar for all the other events and key dates we've got coming up, and any other activities the club has on. Keep an eye out for it, and I'll see you all on the board.
Yeah, Seppo, we might do a quick maybe pre-draft and post-draft pod just to sort of see what happens in about a month's time. The other interesting point for most members, I think, coming through this week, Seppo, was the fact that the new the membership renewals came out, and obviously there was a talk about for particularly if you're at Patterson's that once again the price increased by a fair whack again this year, and for some years it was $50 a seat, which is it's going to be interesting to see how often. I know they seem to increase it every year by quite a bit more than the rate of inflation. So it'll be interesting to see a point whether it becomes just too expensive for people to keep renewing their spot. I mean, obviously the fact that we're doing well and the seats are hard to get, that most people continue doing it, but it'll be interesting if it reaches a crunch point where people, particularly when the new stadium comes around, whether they do end up changing the price structure a little bit to make it more competitive if it's cheaper for people to go to a one-off or say 5 or 6 games rather than doing a membership each year.
That's true. Certainly change the landscape in a couple of years' time.
And also, obviously, the grand final upgrade also went up another $10 this year to $45. So once again, it'll be interesting to see if whether all those people that do have the grand final upgrade decide to renew that, or whether they decide it's just getting a little bit too expensive and give it away for a year or two. All right, thanks very much for joining us, Seppo, for our 50th episode, and let's hope, as I said, everyone enjoys has a quiet off season before we get back into it. As I said, the AFL off season seems shorter and shorter every year. With the draft, the trade news, and everything else, so it won't be too long before we're back into the NAB Cup again.
That's it, and I'll see you all on the board, and looking forward to the draft.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us again this week. Bye for now.